Welcome to HFY Stories. Please subscribe to the channel. Your one click means the world to me. The red tug toy hit the floor before the claws did. It skidded under the front rail of South Training Hall, bounced once off a bench leg, and stopped beside Nady Soren's open training bag. Crumb came after it in a blur of graphite fur, landed with both forepaws over the braided loops, and made the polished deck click under his claws. Every trainee in the live lane stepped back. Nady stayed where she was because Instructor Kale Marr had already passed her over. "Hold," Kale said. His voice cut cleanly across the hall. So did the flat of his scoring stylus against his thumbnail. One tap, the sound he made whenever he had decided something before explaining it. Crumb lowered his head over the toy. The Rosari cub was not small. Even as a juvenile, he had shoulders level with Nady's knees, forepaws broader than her palms, and a chest built like someone had compressed a larger predator into a body still growing too fast for its feet. His short double ear tufts flattened against his skull. A pale crescent under his throat flashed as he turned. The trainee who had been assigned to him froze with both hands raised. "Do not contest the possession," Kale said. "Back out of his radius." The trainee obeyed at once. Crumb hooked the red toy closer with one paw. Then he rubbed the right side of his muzzle against his foreleg. Nady's attention caught on the movement. Kale was already signaling the Xenomedical booth. Active lane juvenile displaying possession defense. "No contact until transfer authority clears." Crumb mouthed one of the braided loops. He jerked his head away. Then he rubbed the same side of his muzzle again. That was the wrong detail. Nady had spent most of the morning being wrong in more ordinary ways. Her training bag sat open because she had been ordered to inventory unused support gear while the other trainees worked live pairings, 2 capped water bottles, 3 clean cloths, a roll of grip tape, a slate pencil, a folded slate gray jacket with 1 repaired elbow seam. Everything neat enough to pass inspection and useless enough to remind her why she was sitting outside the marked floor. 30 minutes earlier, Kale had read the active assignments from his slate. When he reached her name, he had not given her one. Nady Soren, observation bench. There had been a small pause, not a cruel one. Somehow that made it worse. She had asked. Reason. Control latency. She knew the phrase. It had followed her through 3 practice blocks. When a juvenile released an object, Nady tended to return it, instead of holding it to redirect behavior. When an exercise lure had served its purpose, she put it down. When a training animal walked away, she did not extend the interaction simply because she still possessed something it wanted. Kale called that surrendering leverage. Nady called it not stealing things. She had been smart enough not to say that last part out loud. Now Crumb rubbed his muzzle again. The medical booth answered Kale through the wall speaker. "Status stable? No fall, no bleeding, no respiratory change, then transfer before treatment." "We cannot enter a scored juvenile lane under open evaluation." Kale's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Understood. Nady looked at the toy. The red braid was darkened along one loop. Earlier, equipment staff had misted the floor-level play trays with a new grip-safe cleaner. Nady had watched one attendant spray too close to the edge, then wipe in a hurry when the first training group arrived. The cleaner had a sharp mineral scent when wet. The toy had landed in one of those trays during setup. Crumb bit the darkened loop again. His head snapped sideways. "That's not guarding," Nady said. Kale looked at her. "Observation bench means observation. He keeps rubbing after he mouths the same side." The assigned trainee glanced toward Crumb's muzzle. Kale's eyes narrowed. "You are not cleared for contact." "I know." "Then remain outside the lane." Crumb pawed his face harder. Nady reached into her bag. 3 people moved at once. Kale's hand came up. The assigned trainee took another step back. A safety officer near the wall lifted the folded restraint screen from its bracket. Nady only pulled out a squeeze water bottle and 1 clean cloth. "I'm not taking the toy," she said. "That is not the point." "It's exactly the point." She set the bottle on the floor outside the marked line. Crumb's eyes tracked the movement. Nady crouched, but she did not move toward him. She uncapped the bottle, soaked 1 corner of the cloth, and pushed the cloth across the deck with 2 fingers. It stopped an arm's length from Crumb. His growl vibrated through the floor. Nadi took her hand back. Nobody spoke. Crumb stared at the wet cloth, then at Nadi. Then at the red toy beneath his paw. His ear tufts remained pinned. The safety officer unfolded the restraint screen by one section. Crumb's shoulders rose. "Fold that?" Nadi said. The officer looked at Kale. "Nadi," Kale warned. "He's watching it." Kale studied Crumb, then the screen, one tap of stylus against thumbnail. "Fold it." The section disappeared. Crumb's shoulders lowered by a fraction. Nadi picked up the bottle again. "I'm going to put water on the end you're not holding." There was no reason the cub should understand the sentence. She used it anyway, because speaking to an animal-shaped problem as if it were only a problem made her feel like the adults were already losing. She squeezed a thin stream across the loose end of the braid. Water spread pinkish-gray over the floor. Crumb lunged half a step. Several trainees flinched. Nadi stopped the stream and leaned back on her heels. The cub did not cross the distance. He bent and sniffed the wet section. Then he licked his lips, sneezed once, and rubbed his muzzle much less violently. "Cleaner," Nadi said. The medical booth voice sharpened. "Repeat." "Possible surface cleaner on the toy." Kale turned toward the equipment attendant. "What compound was used on juvenile trays?" The attendant went pale. "M17 grip wash. Human contact approved. Rosari mucosal contact." A silence followed. "That clearance is pending." Crumb released the toy. Not because anyone commanded him. He simply lifted his paw, stepped back from it, and sneezed again. Nadi slid the cloth forward, hooked the wet corner under the nearest loop without touching Crumb, and pulled the braid through fresh water while it remained on the floor. She rinsed one loop, then another. When Crumb moved closer, she stopped. When he moved away, she continued. No hands closed around him. No one blocked his retreat. The red color brightened as the residue washed off. The medical booth gave remote instructions. Flush exposed surface. Fresh water only. Monitor breathing and oral swelling. "No swelling," Nadi said. Kale gave her a look. She lifted both hands. Observation. For the first time, the assigned trainee almost smiled. Crumb sniffed the toy again. He mouthed the clean end. This time his head did not jerk. His ear tufts rose halfway. The warning vibration in his chest stopped. A minute earlier, South Training Hall had contained an apex juvenile under apparent resource aggression, a restraint screen, 2 retreating trainees, and a medical team waiting for paperwork. Now Crumb sat down. He put one paw on the toy and yawned. The room exhaled. Kale did not. "Nadi Soren," he said, "you crossed an active evaluation boundary. I crossed it with a water bottle. You altered the conditions. The conditions had detergent on them. That will be reviewed." "Good?" The word came out drier than she intended. Kale's mouth flattened. Then the family gate opened. Orsa then entered at a measured walk, and every Razari-shaped thought in Crumb's body changed direction. His head came up. His tail made one hard sweep against the floor. He seized the red toy in his mouth and ran to his mother. Nadi felt something in her chest loosen. Good. That was where he belonged. Orsa was larger than any adult predator Nadi had stood near without a barrier. Broad shoulders, dark-tipped ears, a pale scar crossing one side of her muzzle. She lowered her head to Crumb, checked his face with 3 short sniffs, then touched her brow to his. Crumb leaned into her for 2 seconds, then he turned away. Not from Orsa entirely, just enough to trot back across the hall. Nadi was still kneeling beside her bag. "Crumb," the assigned trainee whispered. Nobody called him. Nobody offered food. The cub carried his favorite toy straight past the trainee station, past the reward shelf, and past Kale. He stopped in front of Nadi. She kept both hands on her knees. Crumb stared at the open canvas bag. Nadi glanced down. "Don't." The cub pushed his muzzle into the bag. The 3 red loops disappeared between her folded jacket and the roll of grip tape. Crumb withdrew his head. The toy stayed inside. He looked at Nadi once. Then he turned and ran back to Orsa without it. No one in South Training Hall said anything for 4 full seconds. Kale's stylus did not tap. Nadi looked into the bag. A wet red loop rested across her clean cloths. "I'm guessing," she said quietly. That this is going on the review too. It did. A junior clerk finally remembered to breathe and carefully lowered her slate. The assigned trainee stared at Natty's bag as if it had become a dangerous device. Orsa did not look surprised. That bothered Natty more than the silence. The adult Rosari crossed to the edge of the marked lane, but stopped before the human boundary stripe. Crumb pressed against her foreleg, content to leave the toy behind. Kale recovered first. No one touches the bag. Natty looked up. Including me. Especially you. That seems impractical. Until family services identifies the behavior, the object remains where the juvenile placed it. Natty sat back on the bench. Crumb watched for a moment, then discovered something more important near Orsa's hind paw and attacked it with both forelegs. His mother shifted 1 foot out of reach without even looking down. The hall relaxed slowly. Natty did not. Her practicum slate had already changed. Live evaluation, Ivanadated. Below it, a second notice appeared. Accelerated completion, pending review. She read both lines once, then zipped nothing, moved nothing, and left the red toy exactly where Crumb had put it. Orsa's explanation did not arrive until the hall had been cleared of everyone who had discovered an urgent reason to stand near Natty's bag. That took 11 minutes. Kale sent the active trainees to a secondary lane. The medical booth logged the cleaner exposure as mild and resolving. Equipment staff sealed the M17 bottles in a cabinet and began arguing in whispers over who had marked the tray as ready for juvenile use. Natty remained on the bench. Crumb remained with Orsa. The red toy remained in Natty's bag. Family liaison staff finally arrived with a portable barrier marker, 2 slates, and the expression of people who had been summoned to explain why a predator cub had voluntarily abandoned its favorite possession inside a human's personal equipment. Orsa sat beside Crumb. The cub had already moved on emotionally. He was lying on his side, trying to trap his own rear foot with both forepaws. Natty respected that. Kale did not. Family Representative Then, he began, does the placement of a juvenile possession inside an unrelated adult's carry container have a known Rosari meaning? Orsa looked at the bag. Yes, the entire review group leaned closer without moving. Natty asked, is it bad? Orsa turned her dark eyes toward her. If it were bad, I would have removed it. Comforting, it is a safe cache. Kale's stylus lifted. Define. A young Rosari leaves something personally valued where he expects it to remain his. Natty glanced at the open bag. He thinks I'm storage. Crumb rolled onto his back. Orsa's mouth shifted at one corner. In the way a cliff hollow may be storage. Natty nodded slowly. Better than a locker. Kale did not appreciate the distinction. What determines the selection of the cache? Reliability? Familiarity? Sometimes, food association? Possible handler association? Possible family imitation? Possible. Kale looked almost relieved. The behavior had categories again. Then Orsa added, but the important condition is non-taking. Kale's stylus stopped. Natty looked at her. Orsa continued, the object remains the juvenile's. The place is trusted because possession does not change when distance changes. Crumb rolled upright, scratched one ear, and looked toward Natty's bag. He did not approach it. He simply checked. Then he leaned against Orsa and began chewing lightly on the fur above his own wrist. Natty felt the sentence settle. Non-taking. It was uncomfortably close to every criticism in her training file. Kale heard it too. Safe cache does not establish personal attachment, he said. No, Orsa replied. Nor assignment, no. Nor custody, no. Nor obedience. Orsa's gaze sharpened. Why would leaving his own possession somewhere establish obedience? The liaison clerk coughed into her fist. Natty stared at the floor to keep her face neutral. Kale recovered. I am defining what it does not mean. Then define accurately. That ended the first conversation. It did not end the review. By midday, Natty's yellow practicum warning became red. The intervention had been reasonable enough that no disciplinary charge was filed. The evaluation, however, could not stand. She had entered a scored environment without authorization and altered both the physical and behavioral conditions before the assigned trainee completed the response protocol. That meant the accelerated completion block was gone. Kale told her in his office. He did not soften it. You may continue in the standard schedule. 4 additional weeks. Nadi sat across from his desk with her canvas bag on the floor beside her. Family Services had allowed her to move it after Crumb reclaimed the toy. That had happened with no ceremony at all. Crumb had wandered over during a break, stuck his head into the bag, pulled out the red tug, and returned to Orsa. He had not touched Nadi. He had not looked pleased with himself. He had simply recovered his property. Nadi found that oddly reassuring. 4 weeks, she repeated. Yes, my transport voucher expires Friday. You may request a standard extension, which takes 5 business days. Nadi rubbed her forehead. Kale watched her. You made a choice. I rinsed soap off a toy. You entered the lane. I know. You altered a scored event. I know. And you would do it again. Nadi looked at him. Yes. Kale tapped the stylus once. Then I will not insult you by pretending the consequence should surprise you. That was irritatingly fair. She left his office with the practicum extended, the accelerated certificate gone, and no heroic satisfaction to replace either one. At lunch, she ate cold noodles from a paper carton on the loading steps because the cafeteria queue was too long. Crumb passed 20 meters away with Orsa. He did not look at her. Nadi watched him for half a second anyway. Then she finished her noodles. The next week became boring in the precise way she needed it to. She reported at the same hour as everyone else. She attended remedial object control sessions. She cleaned support gear. She practiced route clearance. She worked with simulation drones that had no opinions about personal property and therefore made Kale visibly happier. Crumb stayed in the Rosari family rotation. Sometimes Nadi saw him. Sometimes she did not. On Tuesday, he chased a rolling marker cap beneath a bench and ignored 3 people calling his name. On Wednesday, he slept through an entire sensory acclimation block with his nose under Orsa's tail. On Thursday, he sprinted past Nadi carrying the red tug, turned around only because another juvenile bumped him, then vanished into family court. The absence of constant attention made the toy incident feel more credible, not less. Nadi never fed him. She never called him away from Orsa. She never touched the tug unless staff specifically placed it in cleaning rotation, and when that happened, she set it back on the family rack instead of keeping it near her station. Kale noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything that could be scored. During one remedial session, he handed Nadi a blue synthetic lure. Hold it after the drone releases. For how long? Until the drone offers the next desired behavior. Nadi complied. The drone released the lure, rolled backward, and waited. Nadi held the object. The drone blinked green. She waited for the next programmed behavior. Nothing happened. Kale said, "Continue." The drone remained still. Nadi looked at him. It knows I have the lure. That is the point. No, the point is it's waiting for me to tell it what earns the lure. Yes, and if it doesn't need to earn anything. Kale's expression thinned. The exercise is not philosophy. Good. I'm terrible at philosophy. She held the lure until the drone finally performed the programmed paw target response. Kale marked the slate. Nadi handed the lure back immediately. His stylus paused. She saw it. Neither of them said anything. 2 days later, the medical result on Crumb's toy came through. The M17 cleaner had caused temporary irritation when held against sensitive oral tissue. No lasting injury, no hidden disease, no neurological anomaly, no mysterious Rosari aggression syndrome. A dirty training tray had made a cub's mouth hurt. The equipment department issued a correction notice. Kale attached it to the incident file. Nadi expected that to close the matter. Instead, it opened another one. The Academy's behavior team had reviewed Crumb's placement of the toy in her bag. Their preliminary note used the phrase accidental reinforcement pathway. Nadi read it twice, then a third time because she disliked it more with familiarity. Kale called her into the small review room beside equipment loft. Orsa was already there. So was the family liaison clerk. Crumb was not. Nadi appreciated that too. Kale rotated the slate so they could all see. Current concern, he said, is whether personal containers inside live lanes may function as uncontrolled reward sites. Nady blinked. My bag? Any bag? Because Crumb put his toy in mine, because a juvenile placed a high-value object in a trainee-controlled location immediately after an intervention. Orsa's ears angled forward. Kale continued before she could speak. I am not calling the behavior obedience. I am not calling it assignment. I am saying we cannot yet separate voluntary caching from reinforcement created by the intervention. Nady leaned back. That sounds reasonable enough to be annoying. It usually is. Orsa looked from one human to the other. Kale brought up the proposed temporary rule. Personal juvenile ejects, instructor controlled during scored contact. Nady sat forward. That means you take their own things before the session? Only objects with identified high motivational value, like favorite toys. Yes? And return them when the exercise is complete. Orsa's tail struck the floor once. Kale looked toward her. Temporary control. Not confiscation. Orsa's voice remained calm. You are describing confiscation with a schedule. The liaison clerk looked down very quickly. Kale exhaled through his nose. The academy must distinguish preference from conditioning. Nady studied the rule. A week earlier, she might have argued immediately. Instead, she remembered Crumb checking her bag from beside Orsa, making sure the toy had not changed ownership simply because he had stepped away. She asked, "Do we know why he picked my bag?" Kale looked at her. No. Then we don't know enough to write the rule. That answer seemed to surprise him. Nady surprised herself too. She could have used the toy as proof that Kale had been wrong to pass her over. She wanted to. 4 extra weeks made wanting easy. But Crumb had not placed a certificate in her bag. He had placed his toy there. Those were not the same thing. Orsa lowered her head once in approval. Kale removed the proposed rule from the shared screen. Then we identify the cause first, Nady nodded. For the first time since the incident, the question no longer felt like whether Crumb had chosen her. It felt narrower and much more dangerous to the Academy's assumptions. Why had he trusted her with the one object he kept carrying back? Outside the review room, Nady found Crumb sprawled across the family court threshold with the red tug pinned under his chin. Orsa walked past him. The cub opened one eye, considered following, and decided the floor was better. Nady stopped at the opposite wall. Crumb's eye shifted toward her. Nothing else moved. She waited. After a few seconds, he closed the eye again. Nady adjusted the strap of her training bag and kept walking. Behind her, the toy remained exactly where Crumb had chosen to keep it that entire afternoon. The Academy tried 3 explanations before it considered Nady herself. The first was location. South Training Hall had wide benches, low noise, and a ventilation draft that carried family scent toward the human side. Crumb might have chosen the bag because it happened to sit in a comfortable corridor of air. Facilities moved the bag rack. Nothing useful happened. Crumb ignored the new location completely. The second explanation was material. Candace held scent better than the Academy's sealed polymer bins. Perhaps the fabric had retained the wet cloth smell from the rinse and therefore functioned as an attractive marker. Equipment staff supplied 3 clean canvas sacks. Crumb sniffed one, stepped over another, and stole a trainee's dropped pencil instead. The pencil was recovered without incident. The third explanation was Nady's intervention. Behavior staff suggested Crumb might have linked relief from the cleaner irritation with her presence and then transferred that positive association to her equipment. That possibility survived longer. It was also the explanation Kale preferred because it required no new category. Relief could reinforce proximity. Proximity could shape behavior. Behavior could be trained, measured, and controlled. Nady did not object. You look disappointed, Kale said. They stood beside the observation rail while Crumb and 2 other juveniles worked through a family-led obstacle route. I'd rather be boring and correct than special and wrong. That is a surprisingly responsible statement. Please don't put it on my certificate. You no longer have the accelerated certificate. Nady looked at him. Kale tapped his stylus once. The smallest smile appeared and vanished. Across the lane, Crumb bounded over a low barrier, landed badly, recovered with offended dignity, and immediately attacked the barrier as if it had caused the problem. Orsa nudged him away with one foreleg. Nadi smiled despite herself. The pressure inside the academy grew quietly. Kale did not ban personal toys. He did, however, restrict them during scored blocks while the review remained open. Family-owned objects stayed with family services unless the specific exercise required them. Orsa accepted the temporary rule because it was narrow. Nadi hated it because Crumb spent the first session checking the family rack twice. He did not panic. He did not become aggressive. He simply looked for the red tug, found it behind the family side barrier, and returned to the exercise. That almost proved Kale's point. High-value possession present, high-value possession withheld. Juveniles still completed work. See, one behavior specialist said. No distress, no welfare loss. Orsa's ears angled back. Nadi said, that only proves he can work without the toy, which is operationally relevant. It is. The specialist paused, apparently expecting an argument. Nadi folded her arms. I'm not saying the rule is cruel. I'm saying it still doesn't explain the bag. Kale glanced at her. That distinction became the center of the next 2 weeks. Crumb's behavior refused to become dramatic enough to help anyone. He ate normally. He slept normally. He followed Orsa when she left. He accepted Academy-issued rewards from assigned trainees. He ignored Nadi on several days. Once, he ran directly toward her bench and then veered at the last second because a loose cleaning ribbon was apparently more important than any cross-species bond. Nadi watched him drag the ribbon 3 meters before a custodian retrieved it. Devastating, Kale said from behind her. I'll recover. You may need counseling. Put it in the review budget. The ordinary behavior was useful. It weakened every interpretation that depended on Crumb being fixated on her. No separation distress, no exclusive following, no refusal of other handlers, no loss of family priority. Whatever safe catch meant, it did not turn Nadi into the center of his world. She preferred that. The harder question came from the training department. If Crumb trusted Nadi because she had relieved his irritation, then future human interventions could accidentally create preferential bonds during live evaluations. The Academy would need guidance for that. If he trusted her because she had behaved differently before the incident, then the Academy needed to know what behavior he had observed. Kale requested the previous 6 weeks of South Hall recordings. Nadi heard about it when a records technician arrived at her remedial class carrying 3 archive slates and a portable viewer. You're popular, the technician said. I've been told it's temporary. Kale sent the simulation drones back to storage and converted the afternoon into review work. The first recording was unhelpful. It showed Nadi 6 meters from Crumb during a basic object transfer drill with another juvenile. The juvenile dropped a foam ring. Nadi picked it up. The instructor told her to retain it and redirect. Nadi returned it instead. Archive Kale said, you surrendered the leverage. Archive Nadi said, the exercise ended. Present Kale closed his eyes briefly. Nadi leaned against the review table. You were very consistent. So were you. The second recording showed more of the same. A juvenile released a scent lure after completing a route. Nadi put the lure on the floor beside it rather than carrying it into the next task. Kale marked her down. The third showed her working a gait exercise. The juvenile moved away after the latch opened. Nadi still held a braided target strip. She set it on the rack instead of shaking it to call the animal back. Another deduction. None of this proves Crumb saw anything, the behavior specialist said. Kale nodded. Continue. The records technician widened the image. Family court occupied the upper left corner of the frame. Behind the rail, half hidden under Orsa's chest, sat Crumb. He was looking directly toward the exercise lane. Nobody spoke. The technician moved to the next recording. Crumb again. Different day. Different position. Same lane. Nadi returning the foam ring. Next file. Crumb stretched along the family rail while Nadi placed the scent lure back where the juvenile had dropped it. Next, Crumb's pale throat crescent visible between 2 adults while Nadi opened a gate and let another juvenile leave without using the target strip to call it back. Kale stopped tapping his stylus. Natty felt the air in the room change. The behavior specialist said, "Correlation?" "Of course," Kale replied. "No evidence the juvenile understood the possession exchange. Of course, no evidence he generalized it to her personal bag." Kale looked at the screen. "Of course." Natty stared at the frozen image of herself from 3 weeks earlier. She remembered that day. Kale had written control latency beside her name in red. She had gone home angry. Crumb had been in the background, watching. The records technician opened the scoring overlay. 4 separate deductions appeared across the 6-week set. Returned motivational object too early. Fails to maintain reinforcer control. Allowed juvenile to disengage while taxit value remained available. Relinquished behavioral leverage. Natty read them in silence. Orsa arrived halfway through the review and stood behind the human chairs. Kale replayed the first clip. Natty returned the foam ring. In the background, Crumb's head followed the ring from her hand back to the juvenile. Second clip. The scent lure went down. Crumb watched. Third clip. The gate opened. The juvenile left. Natty did not call it back. Crumb watched. Orsa lowered her head beside Natty. "He was learning you." Natty swallowed. The behavior specialist leaned forward. "That is interpretation." "Yes," Orsa said. Kale's voice was quieter than usual. "But it is now a testable interpretation." Natty looked at him. His eyes remained on the old scoring notes. The reason he had passed her over was on the screen. So was the possible reason Crumb had trusted her. The thought should have felt triumphant. Instead, it made Natty uneasy. "If we decide this means I was right all along," she said, "we're making the same mistake in the other direction." Kale turned. She pointed at the frozen clip. "I was wrong in some of those exercises. The instruction was to maintain the reinforcer. I didn't." The specialist blinked. Natty continued. "Maybe Crumb liked that? Maybe he noticed, but that doesn't make every control exercise bad." Orsa's ears eased outward. Kale said nothing. Natty looked at the red scoring notes again. The question is narrower. Kale finally tapped his stylus. Once, "What question?" Natty answered before she could soften it. "When does a training object stop being leverage and start being somebody else's property?" No one in the room had a ready category for that, which Natty realized was exactly the problem. The next file answered one small part. It was not Natty's class at all. A different trainee had worked a juvenile play return drill while Natty stood at the equipment table in the background. Crumb carried his red tug to the trainee, released it, and received an Academy reward pellet. The trainee held the tug behind one leg until Crumb performed a second requested behavior. Crumb completed the task. No distress. No refusal. Then, when the tug came back, he carried it straight to Orsa. Kale replayed the sequence. "He can tolerate controlled exchange," he said. Orsa nodded. "Of course," Natty frowned. "So this isn't about humans never holding his things." "No," Orsa said. "It is about knowing why they are holding them. That was worse for the proposed rule and better for the Academy. The distinction could not be reduced to never take. Training still had a place. Temporary control could be legitimate. What failed was the assumption that every object with motivational value became institutional leverage the moment a juvenile cared about it. Kale closed the archive. "We need one review, not 6 competing theories." He assigned 3 tasks. Medical would establish the cleaner timeline. Behavior would separate Academy-issued reinforcers from privately carried possessions. Family Services would document Razari safe cage behavior without turning it into a universal species law. Natty received no task. She noticed. Kale noticed her noticing. "You are the subject of part of the review. I can still carry chairs. You may carry chairs." "Excellent." Career recovered. He almost smiled again. The formal session was set for the following afternoon. Natty packed the viewer cables, returned every borrowed slate to its numbered slot, and reached for her bag. A single red fiber clung to the zipper pull. She rubbed it once between finger and thumb, then left it there. Across family court, Crumb had the tug again. He shook it, slapped himself in the cheek, looked offended by the result, and carried it to Orsa. Natty watched him leave. Tomorrow, adults would decide what the toy meant. Crumb already knew whose it was. The review lasted 53 minutes before anyone said the word confiscation. Kale had arranged the room as if furniture could prevent drama. One long table, 4 slates, no audience, no live cub. Orsa sat on the family side. Nady sat opposite her with her canvas bag under the chair. The medical officer and behavior specialist took the remaining seats. Kale opened with facts. M17 cleaner had caused Crumb's temporary oral irritation. The toy had been contaminated before the live exercise. Nady's rinse had removed the irritant. No restraint had been required. Crumb's later safe cage behavior had no evidence of food reward, command, separation distress, or exclusive attachment. Then Kale put the proposed rule on the wall. Personal juvenile ejects, instructor control during scored contact, Orsa read it. No, Kale folded his hands. You have not heard the revised wording. I read the meaning. The behavior specialist leaned forward. The Academy cannot safely operate if every personally valued object becomes exempt from structured use. Orsa's tail shifted once behind her chair. I did not ask for exemption. Nady looked at the screen. Neither did I. Kale glanced at her, then proposed the distinction. Nady wished he had not. She looked at the medical report, the archive clips, the red score marks beside her own name. The blue lure from my remedial drill was made by the Academy for training. Yes, Kale said. The foam ring in the old clip was assigned to the exercise? Yes. Crumb's tug wasn't. No. It came with him. Orsa said. From family. Nady nodded. Then start there. The behavior specialist frowned. Origin is not enough. A private object can still become a reinforcer. Sure. And if it does? Then you ask permission to use it that way. Silence. Nady continued before she lost the nerve. You can train with things. You can teach exchanges. You can temporarily hold something for safety. Would family consent to designated use of a juvenile-owned object in some exercises? Yes. Would family accept temporary removal where immediate safety requires it? Yes. Would safe catch placement prevent staff from moving an object during an emergency? No. Kale. But caring about an object doesn't automatically make it Academy property. Kale's stylus tapped his thumbnail. Once, the behavior specialist looked at Orsa, leaned back. The rule on the wall suddenly looked too broad. Not evil, not cruel. Just lazy. It tried to make one category do the work of 5 decisions. The medical officer spoke next, then classify by function. Academy-issued reinforcement object, family-owned personal object, emergency safety control, family-consented training use. Voluntary placement. Kale looked at Nady. That solves the operational problem. Most problems get easier when you use more than one box. Do not become smug. I lost 4 weeks. I've earned medium smug. Orsa made a low sound. Nady had learned enough Razari expression to recognize amusement. Kale deleted the broad rule. The red text vanished. In its place he entered 5 narrower fields. No one applauded. Nady was grateful. Kale moved to her training record. Second matter. Your control latency deductions. Nady straightened. They remain. She had expected that. The words still pinched. Kale continued. Where an exercise required control of an Academy reinforcer, you failed the stated method. Those scores were valid. Nady nodded. However, the rubric will now distinguish failure to maintain an assigned training object from appropriate return of a juvenile-owned possession. That took longer to absorb. So future trainees can be wrong more precisely. Yes. Progress. Do not test me. The behavior specialist signed the correction. Nady's accelerated completion did not return. No retroactive practicum appeared. 4 weeks remained 4 weeks. She found she could live with that. Kale closed the administrative slate. Orsa did not stand. There is another matter, she said. Kale looked wary. Nady looked more wary. Orsa rose and crossed around the end of the table. Up close, the adult Razari's pale muzzle scar looked less like a dramatic mark and more like an old accident that had healed slightly crooked. Nady kept her hands still. Orsa lowered her head. not to Nadi's face, to the back of Nadi's right hand. Her brow touched Nadi's knuckles for one slow second. Warm fur, steady weight, then Orsa stepped away. Nadi stared at her hand. Kale said nothing. The liaison slate translated the family phrase only after Orsa spoke it. Safe beside what is ours. Nadi's throat tightened. That sounds like a lot. It is less than family, Orsa said. The answer relieved her. Orsa continued, and more than stranger. That was enough. No badge changed. No custody field opened. No juvenile was assigned to her. The review ended. The strongest proof came 20 minutes later, when nobody was trying to create one. Nadi returned to South Training Hall to collect the last of her remedial equipment. Her bag sat open on the bench while she checked 3 route markers against a supply list. Family court opened. Crumb came through beside Orsa. The red tug hung from his mouth. Nadi saw him and deliberately looked back at the list. Marker 1, Marker 2, Marker 3. Crumb crossed the floor. No one called him. He stopped at Nadi's bag. For half a second, she thought he would drop the toy inside again. Instead, he pushed his muzzle into the bag, rooted beneath her folded jacket, and pulled out a small loose loop of red braid that had torn from the tug days earlier. Nadi had not known it was there. Crumb held the scrap and his full toy together awkwardly, then he turned. He went to Orsa first. He pressed his shoulder against her foreleg and placed the loose scrap between her paws. Mother first, always. Orsa sniffed it. Crumb picked it back up, then he crossed to Nadi. The room was quiet enough that she could hear his claws touch the floor. Nadi did not crouch. She did not hold out a hand. Crumb kept his own toy in his mouth. He leaned one shoulder against her knee. Just once. The contact lasted 2 breaths. Nadi looked down at the graphite fur against her training trousers. "Take your toy, kid!" Crumb stepped away. He ran back to Orsa with the tug still his. Kale stood near the far rail. His stylus remained still. No one entered the moment on a scoring sheet. 4 weeks later, Nadi completed the standard practicum, not early, not ceremonially. She passed 2 object control drills, 1 family route assessment, and a final live contact exercise with a juvenile who had no interest in her beyond trying to untie her bootlace. Kale signed the certificate. "Acceptable," he said. "Careful." That sounded like praise. It was not. "Good. I'd worry." She took the certificate and went to her next shift. Marolite changed in smaller ways. Family-owned objects received separate tags from Academy rewards. Staff asked before converting personal possessions into reinforcement tools. Emergency safety still overrode ownership where necessary. Safe cage behavior went into the Rosari guidance notes with 3 warnings in bold: not obedience, not custody, not exclusivity. Nadi's old control latency deductions stayed in her record beside a new rubric note explaining exactly what they had measured. She liked that better than being declared secretly correct. Crumb kept growing. His forepaws stopped looking absurdly large for his body. His ear tufts did not. Some mornings he ran past Nadi without looking at her. Some afternoons he stopped at her bench, shoved the red tug into her bag, chased another juvenile for 10 minutes, then returned to collect it. Once he put a smooth gray pebble in the bag instead. Nadi carried it for an hour before Orsa informed her that Crumb had stolen it from a landscaping tray and absolutely expected to get it back. Nadi returned it. Kale saw. "Control latency," he said. "Terrible condition. Chronic. Probably terminal?" Crumb stole the pebble again. The new tags caused exactly the kind of bureaucratic problem Nadi had expected. For 3 days, half the training staff used the wrong label. A family-owned blanket received an Academy reward sticker. 2 reward balls were logged as private possessions. Someone tagged a mop head as juvenile sentimental property because a cub had carried it 6 meters before being caught. Kale called an emergency staff correction. Nadi attended only because her shift crossed the meeting. "This is not complicated," he said. A technician raised a hand. The mop, cleaning equipment. The juvenile valued it for 6 meters. Strongly, Kale stared at the technician until the hand lowered. Nadi covered her mouth. Orsa, seated near the family door, made the same low, amused sound she had made during the review. The rules settled after that. So did Nadi's role. She was not appointed Razari liaison. She did not become a specialist in safe catch behavior. When a new instructor asked her to explain the custom to a visiting class, she pointed to Orsa. She's the Razari adult. The instructor looked embarrassed. Orsa looked pleased. Crumb spent that lesson asleep under a bench with one paw through the middle loop of his tug. Later, when he woke, he dragged the toy across Natty's boots, dropped it beside her bag, changed his mind, picked it up again, and carried it away. No one recorded which choice was more meaningful. Natty preferred it that way. Trust that required constant proof sounded exhausting. Crumb had a family, a favorite toy, a growing body, bad aim when he pounced sideways, and an academy full of adults slowly learning not to turn every ordinary preference into a test. Natty had her own work too. She learned when to keep a training lure, when to release it, and when to ask whose object she was holding before either choice. Kale stopped calling that hesitation. He started calling it identification. Natty considered that acceptable progress eventually. By the end of the term, nobody gathered around when he approached Natty's bag. That was the best part. The behavior had become ordinary enough to stop being evidence. One late afternoon, Natty finished stacking route markers and hooked her worn canvas bag on the end of the training bench. The zipper pull had begun to fray. A few red fibers from Crumb's tug still clung to the metal ring. Across the practice yard, Orsa walked toward family court. Crumb bounded beside her, bigger now. The battered red toy held firmly in his own mouth. He did not turn back. The bag swung once beneath the bench hook while the red fibers caught the last light.